Welcome to Reading with Nana, and hi to my returning friends. We're going to continue with our novel, Heidi, whose author is Johanna Spiri. The last time we read, we were on chapter 5, and what happened was Heidi's aunt Deta came to take her from her grandfather's house to take her to a new home to be a friend to a girl who is confined to a wheelchair, to keep her company, to be her playmate, more or less. Chapter 6, a new chapter with new things. In a beautiful house in Frankfurt, there lived a sick child by the name of Clara Sesemann. She was sitting in a comfortable wheelchair, which could be pushed from room to room. Clara spent most of her time in the study, where long rows of bookcases lined the walls. This was the room where she was also given her lessons. Clara had a pale, thin face with soft blue eyes, which at last moment were watching the clock impatiently. At last she said, "Oh, Miss Rottenmeier, it is time yet?" The lady thus addressed was the housekeeper, who had lived with Clara since Miss Sesamann's death. Miss Rottenmeier wore a peculiar uniform with a long cape and a high cap on her head. Clara's father, who was away from home a great deal, left the entire management of the house to this lady, on the condition that his daughter's wishes should always be considered. As Clara was sitting there waiting, Detta finally arrived at the front door with Heidi in tow. She asked the coachman who had brought her if she could go upstairs. "That is not my business," grumbled the coachman. "You must ring for the butler." A moment later, Sebastian, the butler, a man dressed in a coat decorated with oversized brass buttons, was standing before her. "May I see Miss Rottenmeier?" Detta asked. "That is not my business," the butler announced. "Ring for Tinette, the maid." With that, he disappeared. Detta rang again, and shortly afterwards saw a girl with a brilliant white cap on her head coming down the stairway. The maid stopped halfway down and asked scornfully, "What do you want?" Detta repeated her wish to the maid. Tinette told her to wait while she went upstairs, but it did not take long before the two visitors were asked to come up. Following the maid upstairs, they found themselves in a study. Detta held on to Heida's hand and stayed near the door. Slowly, Miss Rottenmeier stood up, dressed in her hat and shawl, and looking up at the lady's headdress with an innocent wonder. "What is your name?" the lady asked. "Heidi," was the child's clear answer. "What? Is that a Christian name? What name did you receive at your baptism?" inquired the lady again. "I don't remember that anymore," the child replied. "What is this answer? What does that mean?" said the housekeeper, shaking her head. "Is the child ignorant or rude, Miss Detta?" "I shall speak for the child, if I may, madam," Detta said, after giving Heidi a little blow for her unbecoming answer. "The child has never been in such a fine house, and she does not know how to behave. I hope the lady will forgive her manners. She is called Adelheid, after her mother, who was my sister." "Oh, well, that is better. But Miss Detta, the child seems to act peculiar for her age. I thought I told you that Miss Clara's companion would have to be 12 years old, like her, so she could join her in her studies. How old is Adelheid?" "I am sorry, but I am afraid she is somewhat younger than I thought. I think she is about 10 years old." "Grandfather said I was 8 years old," said Heidi now. Detta gave her another blow, but the child had no idea why. There was no reason to be embarrassed as far as Heidi could see. "What? Only 8 years old?" Miss Rottenmeier exclaimed indignantly. "How are we to get along? What have you learned? What books have you studied?" "None," said Heidi. "But how did you learn to read?" "I can't read, and Peter can't either," Heidi retorted. "For mercy's sake, you cannot read?" cried the lady in her surprise. "How is it possible? What else have you studied?" "Nothing," replied Heidi truthfully. "Miss Detta, how could you bring this child?" the housekeeper asked. Detta, however, was not easily intimidated, explaining to the housekeeper, "I am sorry, but I thought this child would suit you. She is small, but older children are often spoiled, and they are not like her. I must go now, for my mistress is waiting. As soon as I can, I shall return to see how the child is getting along. With a bow, she hurried downstairs, and in a few seconds more, she had stepped outdoors. Miss Rotmeyer followed after her and tried to call her back, but Detta was gone. Heidi was still standing there. Clara had watched the whole scene, and now she called the child over to her. Heidi approached the wheelchair. Do you want to be called Heidi or Adelheid? Asked Clara. My name is Heidi, and that is all, was the child's answer. I'll call you Heidi then, for I like it very much, said Clara. I have never heard that name before. What curly hair you have. Was it always like that? I think so. Did you like to come to Frankfurt? Asked Clara again. Oh, no, but then I'm going home again tomorrow, and I shall bring grandmother some soft white rose, Heidi explained. What an unusual child you are, said Clara. You have come to Frankfurt to stay with me. Don't you know that? We shall have our lessons together, and I think it will be great fun when you learn to read. Mostly, the mornings seem to have no end, for Mr. Candidate comes at 10 and stays until 2. That's a very long time, for he will start to yawn himself behind the books. But when I do it, Miss Rotmeyer makes me take cod liver oil and says that I am ill. So I must swallow my yawns, for I hate the oil. What fun it will be now, especially when you learn to read. Heidi shook her head doubtfully concerning that prospect. Everybody must learn to read, Heidi. Mr. Candidate is a very patient and will explain it all to you. At first, you won't know what he is saying, for it's difficult to understand him. But it won't take long to learn to read, and then you will know what he is trying to teach you. When Miss Rottenmeier found that she was unable to retrieve Detta, she returned to the children. Now she was in an irritable mood, for she felt responsible for Heidi's coming, and she did not know how to undo this unfortunate development. Soon she left the girls and marched into the dining room, criticizing the butler and giving orders to the maid. Sebastian, being careful not to display his anger in any obvious way, opened the folding doors a little more aggressively than usual. As he approached Clara's wheelchair, he noticed Heidi watching him intently. At last she said, You look like Peter. Miss Rotmeyer was horrified by the remark and sent them all into the dining room. After Clara was lifted onto her chair, the housekeeper sat down beside her. Heidi was motioned to sit opposite the lady, and there they sat at the enormous table. When Heidi saw a roll on her plate, she turned to Sebastian and asked, Can I have this? Heidi had already placed a good deal of confidence in the butler, especially on account of his close resemblance to her friend in the Alps. The butler nodded. When he saw Heidi put the bread in her pocket, he could hardly keep from laughing. Then he came to Heidi, offering her a dish of small baked fishes. For a long time, the child did not move. Then, turning her eyes to the butler, she asked him, Must I eat that? Sebastian nodded, and another long pause ensued. Why don't you give it to me? The child quietly asked, looking down at her plate. The butler, hardly able to hold a straight face, was told to place the dish on the table and leave the room. When he was gone, Miss Rotmeyer explained to Heidi with many hand signals how she should handle herself at the table. She also told her to never speak to Sebastian unless it was important. After that, the child was told how to address the servants and the governess. When the question came up what to call Clara, the older girls chimed in. Of course, you shall call me Clara. A great many rules followed now about how to behave in various situations, about the shutting of doors, and about going to bed, and 100 other things. Poor Heidi's eyes were closing, for she had risen at 5 o'clock that morning. And then, her head leaning against the chair, she fell asleep. When Miss Rottenmeier had finished her instructions, she said, I hope you will remember everything, Adelheid. Did you understand me? Heidi has gone to sleep a long time ago, said Clara, highly amused. It is atrocious. All of this I must endure with this child. exclaimed Miss Rottenmeier out loud as she rang the bell with all her might. When the two servants arrived, they were hardly able to rouse Heidi enough to show her to her bedroom. Chapter 7. Miss Rottenmeier has an uncomfortable day. When Heidi opened her eyes the next morning, she did not know where she was. She found herself on a high white bed in a spacious room. Looking around, she observed long white curtains before the windows, several chairs, and a sofa covered with cretonne. In a corner, she saw a washstand with many curious things standing on it. Suddenly, Heidi remembered all the happenings of the previous day. Jumping out of bed, she dressed in a great hurry. She was eager to look at the sky and the ground below, as she had always done at home. What a disappointment it was when she found that the windows were too high for her to see anything except the walls and the windows opposite. Trying to open them, she turned from one to the other, but in vain. The poor child felt like a little bird that is placed in a glittering cage for the first time. At last, she had to resign herself to her present circumstance. She sat down on a low stool, thinking of the melting snow on the slopes and the first flowers of spring that she had hailed with such delight. Suddenly, Tanette opened the door and said curtly, "Breakfast ready." Heidi did not take this for a summons, for the maid's face was scornful and forbidding. She was waiting patiently for what would happen next, when Miss Rottenmeier burst into the room, saying, "What is the matter, Adelheid? Didn't you understand? Come to breakfast." Heidi immediately followed the lady into the dining room, where Clara greeted her with a smile. She looked much happier than usual, for she expected new things to happen that day. When breakfast had passed without disturbance, the two children were allowed to go into the library together and were soon left alone. "How can I see down to the ground?" Heidi asked. "Open a window and peep out," replied Clara, amused at the question. "But it is impossible to open them," Heidi said sadly. "Oh no, you can't do it, and I can't help you either, but if you ask Sebastian, he'll do it for you." Heidi was relieved. The poor child had felt like a prisoner in her room. Clara now asked Heidi what her home had been like, and Heidi told her gladly about her life in the hut. The tutor had arrived in the meantime, but he was kept from going into the study as usual. Miss Rottenmeier was very much disappointed with Heidi's coming and all the problems that therefrom. She felt responsible for this, having arranged everything herself. She detailed the unfortunate situation for the teacher in hopes that he would help her to get rid of the child. Mr. Candidate, however, was always careful of his judgments and not afraid to introduce new students to the ABCs. When the lady saw that he would not side with her, she allowed him to enter the study alone. While she continued thinking upon these problems that came with the new little visitor to the home, a frightful noise as of something falling was heard in the adjoining room, followed by a cry to Sebastian for help. Running in, she beheld a pile of books and papers on the floor with a table cover on top. A black string of ink flowed across the length of the room. Heidi had disappeared. "There!" Miss Rodmeyer exclaimed, wringing her hands. "Everything drenched with ink. Did such a thing ever happen before? This child brings nothing but misfortunes on us." The teacher was standing up, surveying the devastation, but Clara was highly entertained by these events and said, "Heidi has not done it on purpose and must not be punished. In her hurry to get away, she caught on the table cover and pulled it down. I think she must have never seen a coach in all her life, for when she heard a carriage rumbling by, she rushed out like mad. Didn't I tell you, Mr. Candidate, that she has no idea whatever about how to behave? She does not even know that she has to sit quiet at her lessons. But where has she gone? What should Mr. Sesman say if she should run away?" When Miss Rotmeyer went downstairs to look for the child, she saw her standing at the open door, looking down the street. "What are you doing here? How can you run away like that?" scolded Miss Rotmeyer. "I heard the fir trees rustle, but I can't see them and do not hear them any more," replied Heidi. looking in great perplexity down the street. The noise of the passing carriage had reminded her of the roaring of the south wind on the Alps. Fir trees, what nonsense! We are not in a wood. Come with me now to see what you have done. When Heidi saw the devastation that she had caused, she was greatly surprised, for she had failed to notice in her hurry. This must never happen again, said the lady sternly. You must sit quiet in your lessons. If you get up again, I shall tie you to the chair. Do you hear me? Heidi understood and promised she would sit quietly during her lessons from that time on. After the servants had straightened the room, it was late, and there was no more time for studies. Nobody had time to yawn that morning. In the afternoon, while Clara was resting, Heidi was left to herself. She planted herself in the hall and waited for the butler to come upstairs with the silver things. When he reached the head of the stairs, she said to him, I want to ask you something. She saw that the butler seemed angry, so she reassured him by saying that she did not mean any harm. All right, miss. What is it? My name is not Miss. Why don't you call me Heidi? Miss Miss Rottenmeier told me to call you Miss. Did she? Well, then, it must be so. I have 3 names already, sighed the child. What can I do for you? Asked Sebastian now. Can you open a window for me? Certainly, he replied. Sebastian got a stool for Heidi, for the windowsill was too high for her to see over. In great disappointment, Heidi turned her head away. I don't see anything but a street of stone. Is it the same way on the other side of the house? Yes. Where do you go to look far down on everything? From the church tower. Do you see that one over there with the golden dome? From there, you can overlook everything. Heidi immediately stepped down from the stool and ran downstairs. Opening the door, she found herself in the street, but she could not see the tower anymore. She wandered on from street to street, not daring to address any of the busy people. Passing a corner, she saw a boy who had a barrel organ on his back and a curious animal on his arm. Heidi ran to him and asked, Where is the tower with the golden dome? Don't know, was the reply. Who can tell me? Don't know. Can you show me another church with a tower? Of course I can. Then come and show me. What are you going to give me for it? Said the boy, holding out his hand. Heidi had nothing in her pocket but a little flower pitcher. Clara had only given it to her that very morning, so she was loath to part with it. The temptation to look far down into the valley was too great for her, though, and she offered him the gift. The boy shook his head to Heidi's satisfaction. What else do you want? Money? I have none, but Clara has some. How much must I give you? 20 pennies. All right, but come. While they were wandering down the street, Heidi found out what a barrel organ was, for she had never seen one. When they arrived before an old church with a tower, Heidi was puzzled what to do next. But, having discovered a bell, she pulled it with all her might. The boy agreed to wait for Heidi and to show her the way home if she gave him a double fee. The lock creaked now from the inside, and an old man opened the door. In an angry voice, he said, How do you dare to ring for me? Can't you see that it is only for those who want to see the tower? But I do, said Heidi. What do you want to see? Did anybody send you? Asked the man. No, but I want to look down from up there. Get on home, and do not ring the bell again. With that, the tower keeper was going to shut the door, but Heidi held his coattails and pleaded with him to let her enter. The tower keeper looked at the child's eyes, which were nearly full of tears. All right, come along if you care so much, he said. Taking her by the hand, the two climbed up now many, many steps, which got narrower all the time. When they had arrived on top, the old man lifted Heidi up to the open window. Heidi saw nothing but a sea of chimneys, roofs, and towers, and her heart sank. Oh dear, it's different from the way I thought it would be, she said. There, what could such a little girl know about a view? We'll go down now, and you must promise never to ring at my tower any more. On the way, they passed an attic where a large gray cat guarded her new family in a basket. This cat caught half a dozen mice every day for herself, for the old tower was full of rats and mice. Heidi gazed at her in surprise and was delighted when the old man opened the basket. What charming kittens! What cunning little creatures! She exclaimed in her delight. When she saw them crawling about, jumping and tumbling over each other, would you like to have one? The old man asked. For me to keep? Heidi asked, for she could not believe her ears. Yes, of course. You can have several if you have room for them, the old man said, glad to find a good home for the kittens. How happy Heidi was. Of course, there was enough room in the huge house, and Clara would be delighted when she saw the cunning things. How can I take them with me? The child asked after she had tried in vain to catch one. I can bring them to your house if you tell me where you live, said Heidi's new friend, while he caressed the old cat who had lived with him many years. Bring them to Mr. Sesame's house. There is a golden dog on the door with a ring in his mouth. The old man had lived in a tower a long time and knew everybody. Sebastian was also a close friend. I know, he said, but to whom shall I send them? Do you belong to Mr. Sesame? No? Please send them to Clara. She will like them, I am sure. Heidi could hardly tear herself away from the pretty things, so the old man put one kitten in each of her pockets to console her. With that, Heidi left the old man. The boy was waiting patiently for her, and when she had taken leave of the tower keeper, she asked the boy, Do you know where Mr. Sesame's house is? No, was his reply. She described it as well as she could till the boy remembered it. Off they went, and soon Heidi found herself pulling the doorbell. When Sebastian arrived, he said, Hurry up! Heidi went in, and the boy was left outside, for Sebastian had not even seen him. Come up quickly, little miss, he urged. They are all waiting for you in the dining room. Miss Rottmeyer looks like a loaded cannon. How could you run away like that? Heidi sat down quietly on the chair. Nobody said a word, and there was an uncomfortable silence. At last, Miss Rottmeyer began with a severe and solemn voice. I shall speak with you later, Adelheid. How can you leave the house without a word? Your behavior was very amiss. The idea of walking about till so late. Meow, came the reply. I didn't, Heidi began. Meow. Sebastian nearly flung the dish on the table and disappeared. This is enough, Miss Rottmeyer tried to say, but her voice was hoarse with fury. Get up and leave the room. Heidi got up. She began again. I made meow, meow, meow. Heidi, said Clara now, why do you keep saying meow? Again. When you can see that Miss Rottenmeier is so angry. I am not doing it. It's the kittens, she explained. What? Cats? Kittens? Screamed the housekeeper. Sebastian, Tanette, take the horrible things away. With that, she ran into the study, locking herself in, for she feared kittens beyond anything on earth. When Sebastian had got control of his laughing, he came into the room. He had foreseen the excited reactions when he had caught sight of the kittens. Heidi carried him in with her. The scene was a very peaceful one now. Clara held the little kittens in her lap, and Heidi was kneeling beside her. They both played happily with the two graceful creatures. The butler promised to look after the newcomers and prepared a bed for them in a basket. A long time afterwards, when it was time to go to bed, Miss Rottmeyer cautiously opened the door. Are they gone? She asked. Yes, replied the butler, quickly seizing the kittens and taking them away. The lecture that Miss Rottmeyer was going to give Heidi was postponed to the following day, for the lady was too much exhausted after her fright. They all went quickly to bed, and the children were happy that their kittens had a comfortable bed for the night. That's all for now. It was a fun day after all for Heidi and Clara, and fun for the frightened Miss Rottenmeier? I don't think so. Anyway, click like or subscribe. Until next time, when we pick up great disturbances in the Sesame House.